Hello, Jana. Welcome.
Hi, Barbara. How are you?
Yeah, I'm fine, thank you. I'm very glad to talk to you today and to ask you some questions about your intercultural background. And I'm very happy that you decided and that you are willing to share your story and also your insights coming from the intercultural world.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you for having me, and I'm excited to.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's like a little bit this talks with trainers got a little bit like a tradition here. So we have
Mhm.
plenty of nice trainers. I'm very happy that you are one of them. So tell
Thank
me
you.
something about yourself. How did you come to being an intercultural trainer? Where was your journey? How was your journey?
Well, in a sense, I would have to say that it was rather straightforward, although still a little unexpected. So when I started thinking what to do with life, like most of us do at a certain age, I had a strong leaning towards academia. I was always a human science person, so I went into studying anthropology
Mhm.
and focusing on the Middle East because that's basically where my big passion lies. And I also live in Cairo, so that worked out very well. And so I actually came, as I was studying anthropology, I realized that, it's kind of nice to talk about or to basically discover other cultures, but what do you do with that? Yeah, because most social sciences have this tendency of being the observer and analyzing the facts, coming up with the facts in the first place. But then it stops there. What happens with the encounters themselves? How do we actually, now that we know that we're different, that we have different ways of thinking, different styles of communication, and the different values, and therefore also different behaviors, what do we do with that? And that's when I actually stumbled upon the intercultural field. Another angle was also that I was coming from Czechoslovakia at the time, coming in, living in a country where your opportunities of traveling and opening your horizons are rather small. And at the same time, my family was very open-minded. So I always had this tendency of going out there and exploring, and at the same time feeling it may not be possible. And unfortunately, in '89, that has changed quite considerably, to my benefit. And so I was benefiting from this wave of basically intercultural exchanges, or basically high school exchanges that started at the time, and they were kind of mushrooming. But I went on an exchange, like many people who entered this field. However, I had absolutely no support. I wasn't going through an organization. It was organized by my high school. So basically, I've had this, rather life-changing experience between 17 and 18, where I traveled to another country seemingly to learn a language, and I come back a different person. And nobody I talk to has had a similar experience. So nobody can
Yeah.
more or less connect to what I'm going through and help me figure out what the heck happened, right? And that's why I also, during my university first years, I started going into all kinds of, attending all kinds of student conferences around Europe at the time. And that's how I stumbled upon some very interesting people who actually told me there's such a thing as the intercultural field. And they actually introduced me to Young CETAR, or the CETAR network. And I went to their first congress, which actually happened to be in Poland, and my mind was blown for two reasons. First of all, I finally found a group of people, my tribe, who went through similar experiences, and they had names for what has happened to me. Mm-hmm. And there was a whole emerging field that I've never heard of, which was very much connected with what I was studying, and at the same time taking a much more multidisciplinary and practical approach. So I was totally hooked.
Fantastic.
So that happened more or less by now 20 years ago.
20 years ago, yeah.
And from that moment on, yeah.
It feels very similar to my experience as well, right? You just like do things on your own, and then you meet your tribe, and wow, there are people out there who are exactly the same. Great. That sounds very nice. But when did you decide to go from just being a student and being in an exchange programs and meeting people? Where does this transfer happen into the business life, and how did this go? When did you decide to go, yeah, now I want to make a profession out of it?
Mm-hmm. Well, that happened a bit slower in my case and more indirectly because at the time I was more or less on an academic track. I was finishing my master's, going into my PhD, but at the same time I had this second identity of actually working with Young CETAR closely, organizing congresses, but always being in the background and being kind of the event organizer, but not really the content provider, so to speak, or the trainer. Because I always felt as an introvert, which would be my primary or one of my identifications, I don't really like to be around big crowds, until I realized that actually it is, for me as an introvert, actually it works much better because I have a role to play. And I realized that I actually really, really enjoy working with other people and basically working along the topics that I find passionate, which is basically human encounters and the differences that we inherently have in us, and how does that basically translate, and how can we push against our default settings of this homogeneous upbringing that most of us have had still on the planet. Basically, the bottom line was that at one of the Young Cedar Congresses, one of the other organizers, who was actually a trainer, said, "Well, Jana, why don't you just come up here with me, and let's design this session together, and let's get you out there and see how it feels." And since that moment, I was hooked. This was more or less, I don't know, early 2004, 2005. And so at that point, I was like, well, is academia really what I want to be doing? Or, basically being hooked means start having doubts about your very certain focus on life, right? So basically, the moment I came to Cairo, I realized, well, academia is nice, but let's face it, it's not really as exciting as what I'm at that point was doing on the side as a volunteer. Still not completely sure that I have the courage to actually break free from, what is the path and what everybody expects of me, and taking it to the next step and completely changing my career. So I finished the PhD, and at that moment, I already more or less was kind of transitioning into the intercultural field as a trainer, as a consultant. It took a few more years because I took the path of, this careful approach of working for NGOs, still enjoying kind of more of this vision of what it could be, and also feeling that because I didn't have a proper business background, as many of the trainers would, because this, of course, let's face it, this industry is very much connected to the business side. I felt that my academic background is not strong enough to basically have me approaching those markets. And that has changed when I started working with one of the large relocation providers. I took their face-to-face training in England some time ago. And at that point, I realized, talking to other people who have been professionals in this field, that actually my experience in the NGOs is more than enough. And that actually my approaches that I have, the frameworks that I'm using, basically the approaches that I take to the intercultural field and also to the training itself, that has stemmed from experience of working for NGOs, meeting with the theater crowd, are actually enough. I don't have to have a business background myself to be able to enter this field. And that's when things started happening. And at that point, I decided, okay, this is it. I am an intercultural trainer. So this is what I am.
Okay, that sounds very, very fascinating, especially because I believe like many people are doubting their skills, especially at the beginning, like where do I fit in? If I'm coming from an NGO environment or an environment where I was just a volunteer, so how much can I approach someone from a business level or at the business level who appears to be so far away? So it's very nice that you just like encourage us to just like go out there and just like to do it. The thing is, how long did it take? Because you said it took you a few years to make the transition. So how long was it? Like, what was the process in years before you really started like working and trusting yourself to go out there and deliver intercultural training for a business client?
Probably around 4 or 5 years.
Okay, so it's not happening from day 1 to day 2, which is also a very interesting.
I mean, me being me and also living in Egypt, which is, or especially living in Cairo, which is a very social environment, I was also doing several things at the same time, which is, I think, what happens to also a lot of people who are, decide to freelance, that you have this tendency at the beginning to take basically almost any job that comes your way because you have this financial need, sustain yourself.
Sure.
And that is, of course, sidetracking you from the goal itself. Yeah. So what most, I would say, coaches and basically career professionals are telling you these days, and I kind of agree with them, is, go and, if you decide this is what you want, plunge in and take the risk. Yeah. If I went back in retrospect, I would definitely try to keep a much stronger focus on what I was doing at the time.
So just like not really doing a lot of things around it, but really focus and maybe support yourself with financials with a little bit of work and then go for, okay, that's quite an interesting thing. So how, like coming back to this one or like continuing this topic, what is the balance between really now in your life between delivering intercultural trainings or session or diversity sessions? I know that you have a lot of skills and a lot of programs. And what is the balance between this and doing other things like projects or maybe working for an NGO or going social in Seattle? So how would you
No, by now I am definitely focused only on what I do. I mean, you know, whenever you talk to people, they always tell you that for one of the hardest thing for a freelancer to do is to say no. You know, wherever the money is coming from, to basically say no, sorry, I am not either interested or I don't have the time. Oh well, normally of course we would say we don't have the time,
yeah,
because for obvious reasons, right? To get back to that question, I'm definitely right now focusing on what I do. And sometimes it means giving up on some other opportunities. But by now, you know, I do also reporting, report writing, all kinds of things that were kind of related to the field. And I always said, well, you know, the justification was not just necessarily the financial side, but also the experience that you gain from the background work and the connections that you gain and so on and so forth, which for that time was great. But by now, it's definitely, I'm definitely focusing on what the niche that I built for myself.
Yeah, that's very valuable. Coming back, because there is this topic still in the air everywhere, actually. Coming back to the financials, how did you find your first client, or how do you still find clients? How would you advise, especially young trainers, but not only, right? Well, what is your tactics?
Well, my tactic can seem a little bit old-fashioned because I still rely a little bit on, or kind of rather, in a big part, I rely on word of mouth and on the network that I have created till this point. So for me, I know that the big rave right now is going through social media, and to a certain degree that works too, because I am getting a lot of proposals actually through LinkedIn by now as well. I mean, when I joined LinkedIn about 10 years ago, nobody knew about it. And then all of a sudden something changed, right? I guess many of us have that experience. Basically, by now, it is, so LinkedIn would be one of my sources, but the primary source is usually really either organizations I have worked with or basically businesses I have worked with, word of mouth, other people basically telling,
but is
kind
it
of But also, just to finalize this thought, it has a lot to do also with the context of where I live. I mean, being based in Egypt, this is still a very much face-to-face, very much network-oriented culture. Yeah. So when I have projects within the region and in Egypt itself, that's when the word of mouth comes much more. When I work in Europe, that would be primarily through connections I have established in the past. Many of them actually are coming from the NGO, because when you think about it, many of the people who started in the NGO business, or basically went through the NGO network, eventually did get those corporate jobs, training agencies, and they remember you because you worked together, right? And you had fun. NGO work, you have a lot of fun. Actually, I still believe that I believe that what I do provides a lot of fun in itself. But the bottom line is that those people have also evolved. And now, more or less, the other day when I was looking at my network, I realized, like, wow, look how much that time has really paid off. Not in terms of just experience, but also in terms of future gains.
So does it mean, Jana, that the network finds you, or you find the network and you really go and ask, hey, Mark, do you think you would need an intercultural training or diversity session, or is it something that Mark comes to you and asks you? What is the way?
Well, again, I also believe that as a trainer, as a freelancer, you have to kind of be a bit genuine about who you are and where you're coming from and what are your default settings, so to speak, that you kind of work against or with. And so for me, the default would be I have the tendency to rather wait to be approached than to approach myself. But that is also changing. Yes, the more experience I'm gaining, the more work I have. Now I'm also, by now, I definitely am more confident in going out there and approaching my networks and saying, well, I'll be here and there, doing this work. Any chance we can meet up and see about potential cooperation or anything, in the area, anybody interesting that I could approach that once I'm over there, I might as well do something else.
Sounds very fair. Fair enough. And also for every trainer, it's so important, freelancer, it's so important to have a personal pitch, and not only one, but probably few, which are fitting into the occasion, right? So if I'm an intercultural trainer, I just pitch, and depending on who I'm talking to. So this is one of the crucial aspects, how to introduce myself and my needs, and also my offer in 3 or 5 sentences, don't you think?
Absolutely. And at the beginning, it doesn't come easy, but it gets easier, once you become more certain about what it is that you're actually really doing and what you really want from life.
Once I was in a training, that's very funny. Once I was in a training about pitching, it's like so long time ago, and I have been kind of sure that I will be learning one pitch, and the trainer was so confused, like, one pitch, where are the others? So we needed really to prepare like 10 pitches, according to the situation, like in the lift, on the street, in the shop. So you just kind of approach different people with different stories, which is quite interesting. So storytelling as well. Okay, Jana, and thank you so much for sharing. I have one more question, because it's also very often a topic, also in the intercultural trainer or online sessions that we deliver. Can you live out of being a freelancer in the intercultural sector, or is it still important to have like a back income, or like additional income?
No, I would say it is definitely possible. It is definitely possible, because what happens is that if you really dedicate yourself to this, if you have the passion, that passion translates. What I mean by that is that, the more you work in this field, the more experience you have, the more people you meet, the more work comes your way. And if you're genuine about what you're doing and why you're doing it, the money should never be the main question here. And coming from a rather idealistic background, let's face it, also educationally speaking. However, this is something I strongly believe in, and I've seen it work. The moment you believe in what you're doing, the moment you believe in the messages that you're spreading within your work, that's what counts, and that's what people connect to. It's the storytelling that you mentioned, but storytelling that is really genuine, and that's about you and that you're providing for the world. So absolutely, you can live off it. And there's a lot of people who are basically doing this on a full-time basis without having any backdoor. So yes, absolutely.
That's very nice. Actually, that's a good feeling. That's really like giving hope that there are people doing the things, and like we can follow, or there are still people who can earn, and it can be a profession. It doesn't need to be something beside, something that I
absolutely not. And and also think about it from the kind of global perspective of what's happening in the world right now. Economically, we're talking about, yes, well, the money needs to go elsewhere because services are suffering the most. At the same time, the businesses are becoming more and more interconnected, and intercultural communication as a global skill is basically out there. When you go online, there's more and more talk about it. So I think it's been, it was needed 100 years ago. It was definitely needed much more 20 years ago, but we're getting there. Slowly but certainly, we're getting there. And, even within big HR departments, intercultural communication is becoming a buzzword and has been there for quite a while now. So yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. Jana, I just told you one more question, but there is another one.
Absolutely.
What would you say is the change? What changed from when you have been starting out until now in this intercultural field? So where does it go? Which direction does it go? Is it still the same, or do you see changes? Do you think like some things are not important anymore? Some others, like also topics, got more and more important. Like which way to go? What would you say according to your experience?
Well, we're kind of, I actually have a feeling that intercultural competence is, as a word or as an approach, is almost coming back and is gaining strength together with diversity. Okay, diversity and inclusion is, of course, a huge buzzword at the moment, or a huge topic. Most companies are doing it out of compliance reasons, obviously. So, in that sense, it has future and potential. I tend to look at it more from the perspective of it's all about working with difference. And we're all different, no matter whether it's a multinational company or it's a local company. I mean, these days you just cannot, live without that. And there's a huge focus on identity in everybody's life, and this is basically what we're working with. So, so I would say that what has changed, though, from the kind of theoretical framework, let's say, is that we're not talking so much more about culture per se as we're talking about identity, and the different various backgrounds that you have. So going from a more or less stereotyping to unconscious bias, if you want to put it that way.
Big topic.
Big topics which are in a sense, talking about the same thing at the end of the day, just using a slightly different angle of how it is approached. And another thing that has changed, and I would say definitely not for the better, but then again, there's things that are happening in the world these days that we could put into that same category of not so positive changes, is actually looking at the kind of the global market in the sense of this neo-capitalist approach, as I like to call it, which basically means that what we've seen a lot, let's take the example of relocation work, which is still, a big part of what we do as intercultural trainers. What has changed a lot, and I'm not a big fan of that, is we're turning from quality to quantity. And I've talked to my colleagues, and I think we're all on the same page here, which is definitely not a good development for us. What I mean by that is that we're going from 2-day relocation training to basically 3 hours, or half a day, as they like to call it, where you're expected to deliver the same content and have the same outcomes as after 2 days. And they still kind of consider that they should be somehow connected to transformational learning. Now, talking to anybody in the learning and education industry, that is of course absolute nonsense. But it is unfortunately stemming from this push for more and more for less and less. Yeah, so this is definitely something I really have a problem agreeing with because it simply doesn't work. I would say it's the predominant trend of the last few years. I still feel that there are small shifts in that too. People realizing that going for that extreme of quantity has never really worked. Going for any extreme never really works. But I have seen that trend a lot. And however, normally I would say for myself, I usually refuse to take assignments that are 3 hours long and call it a training. And then I am very clear at explaining to the client why. That is, in a sense, what I'm kind of getting into is the ethics versus the reality. But I believe, again, being genuine to who I am and how I do my work, I want to be honest with the client and basically tell them I'd rather not take this assignment despite the money that it would bring in, because I'm basically not being true to myself.
Yeah, fair enough.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Fair enough. Yeah, that's also happening to me a lot. Last year I had an assignment for 2 hours talking about the German aspects of making business, doing business for a huge company. And I unfortunately needed to refuse since I didn't know how to transfer not only the do's and don'ts, which is like kind of,
where do we begin? Yes.
Yes, exactly, in 2 hours, right? So that wasn't the aim for me, at least, maybe the aim for the company. So this is exactly how it happens. What I see as a big shift, as a big change in this years is definitely a lot more virtual work. So when I started, it was like really everything was happening face to face, and there was even this conscious of we need to be face to face with the client.
Right.
And I see in this time being on this 20 years or 18 years, so many things happen. So now we are connecting with clients from all over the world, and it's doable, it's good, it's kind of possible to have a very good, to deliver a very good session with a group from all over the world. So that's a huge change. I would actually, being a new trainer, young trainer, or also someone who just like enters this profession, just to have a look in the opportunities of the virtual world.
Oh, absolutely. No, I definitely agree with you. There's definitely much more emphasis on online learning, or at least blended. Yeah. So
amazing, huh? So this is what we're doing now. So very beautiful to.
Absolutely. Here we are.
I'm somewhere in the south of Germany right now. You in the middle of Egypt, and here we are talking to each other, exchanging ideas. Jana, yes. I'm very happy and very grateful that you have been with me today.
My absolute pleasure as well.
Nice, and I hope we see each other very, very soon. And for here, I thank you very much, and I hope we will be having a good day today.
Absolutely, same to you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.